Hello, YouTube. So, in this discussion, I'm gonna cover my impressions of Kubecon Detroit last week. And so, most of everyone that was there is probably home. But KubeCon basically went for, what was it, from Wednesday mostly through Friday. And anybody that had some labs or full day sessions was probably there Monday and Tuesday. So there were a lot of people in town that were there from Monday all the way to Friday. But what was impressive was the amount of attendees. This is probably, I think this is my fourth KubeCon. And, obviously there was no KubeCon. I think last year, obviously, Los Angeles, and there's been some in Europe. But there hasn't been I haven't attended a KubeCon since 2019, which was in San Diego. So it was really nice to get back to the conference and kind of see what's going on. And I basically want to share some of the highlights. And that's also from my perspective. And so, everyone has a different perspective. I'm not a contributor necessarily, but I can share kind of what I thought was interesting. And that's what I'm going to do in this blog. One thing with KubeCon is that everyone had to wear a mask, and you couldn't eat and drink in the rooms, which kind of was okay. But what was impressive was some of the rooms were standing only, especially the one that was on performance with regards to IPv6. I thought that was really interesting. I wanted to attend that session specifically because I wanted to see how many people were interested in dual stack. And it kind of caught me by surprise. The room was full standing only, and there was a lot of deep discussion around IPv6 performance. And I think it was the gentleman from Cilium that was actually trying to enhance the IPv6 deployment and the network stack using, believe Cilium CNI with the eBPF, if I'm not mistaken. And I thought that was really interesting, and I actually went to talk to him a little bit afterwards, specifically about Cilium CNI, and it seems like there was a lot of traction at the show. So when it comes to CNIs, there was nothing on OVN Kubernetes, which I thought was really interesting. No presentations, no discussions, no booth. And so maybe it's just default. Maybe it's more integration in OpenShift. But I didn't see anything at the show. So I kind of thought that was interesting. Of course, there was, Calico was doing their thing from a CNI perspective, and Cilium was kind of also there, as well as their parent companies that actually, mostly contribute to that stuff as well. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Kind of where that goes is to be determined. Most of what I see from the default perspective is more node port, and then probably Calico, default BGP kind of running, but definitely starting to see more Cilium. So starting to watch that a little bit more. So that's really from the CNI perspective, but not too much, but a lot of interest in like I said, IPv6, and so that was interesting. On another front, specifically on ingress, it definitely seems coming into the show that ingress it's kind of reached its maturity. There's probably nothing new that's going to happen within ingress. Ingress class, I don't believe is going to get developed on. I think it's just going to continue. Maybe it's kind of like it is what it is. Potentially, maybe it's sustaining. It seems like all the effort now is on Gateway API. And so there was a couple of sessions around Gateway API and the reasons why Gateway API, specifically from some of the contributors. It seems like Google is contributing quite heavily to Gateway API. There was a Gateway API demo in the Nginx booth. And so they're working on that. couple of other vendors are also working on the whole concept of gateway API. So it seems like now it's in beta. A lot of people that I spoke with weren't really familiar with it, so it's more term and terminology. I think it's got some time. Maybe next Kubecon we'll probably hear a little bit more about it, but it's definitely coming. So I thought that was really interesting. So that's specifically on the gateway API. It's definitely an eye-opener for me. I like the idea of the gateway being at the cloud provider. It kind of breaks up the tenants, or it breaks up the personas quite well, and then the HTTP routing kind of falls underneath that. It kind of lines quite well. I personally think that gateway API was derived from utilizing CRDs. This show very much emphasized a lot on what's going on specifically with CRDs. It was really interesting to see the discussion around CRDs. CRDs now mainstream. Everyone's using CRDs. So many conversations with regards to CRDs. So that's good to see, especially for organizations that have built their own schemas based on CRDs. So, for example, CIS is pretty mature now with regards to CRDs. And so that's kind of an area where CIS is going to do really, really, really well, specifically around that side. The next piece that I thought was really interesting was the concept of multi-cluster, right? So everyone is now doing more than one cluster. It's about cluster management. On my way out of Kubecon, I actually met someone at the bar, actually in the airport, and we were talking about clusters. And this gentleman happens to have hundreds, if not thousands, of clusters. So cluster management is big. How do you potentially load balance across clusters? Or what happens if I have pods in multiple clusters? How do you distribute traffic? That is definitely kind of top of mind. And that's kind of where I see, kind of like F5 Big IP being influential in this space, is to provide this whole concept of potentially cluster load balancing, Big IP to pod across multiple clusters. And definitely interested in that space, and actually have really put some feelers out there and are doing some prototypes. So it's really interesting concept around the concept of multi-cluster. The other thing that I thought was also really interested in the show was the discussions were very technical. And sometimes, unfortunately, a lot of the slides were not online, so you actually, kind of had to take some pictures. But the discussions were so technical that, from a technical audience perspective, this is really a developers conference. And so if you're in the application developer space with regards to Kubernetes, this is kind of like your conference to attend to, which I really like, actually. So it's not so much like product management or just a vendor kind of talking. It's actually developers that are using this stuff. So that's a really good perspective of why to attend KubeCon. So those are some of the things that I thought stood out for me. But it was ultimately great to be back. And even though people were wearing masks, it's been a couple days now, so the show was safe. It was actually really good, and so that hopefully see everybody at the next KubeCon. That's some of the things that that kind of stood out. There's a lot more. I could talk for hours, but I just want to kind of give a little brief update of some of the things that I kind of saw was interesting.